there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O God, grant that I may not seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is helping the needy that we live eternally. Amen.
Amen. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll now request you to kindly raise a glass if you have something to drink. Alternatively, we can have the hand to the chest as we raise a toast to the President of the Republic of Kenya. To the President. Right, I will now request Vice President Ambassador Dr. Josephine Ojiambo to kindly share with us any announcements.
President Ritesh, fellow Rotarians, would you allow me just 1 minute, President Ritesh, and I will return to give you the full detail of the announcement.
Certainly, certainly.
Yes.
Thank you. And whilst we wait for the announcements, I'm going to request all visiting Rotarians to kindly introduce themselves. Do we have any visiting Rotarian? Yes, we do. The first visiting Rotarian we have seems like family already. Past President Leah.
Thank you, President Ritesh, fellow Rotarians and guests and all protocols observed. My name is Past President Leah Bryant of the Rotary Club of Bahari, Mombasa. I'm also a major donor, very proud to say that. Thank you very much for inviting me to the meeting today.
Thank you for always being present for our meetings. You really are a great support and are part of the family at Rotary Club of Nairobi. Welcome. And I believe we have Rotarians who have guests today. So I'll begin by asking Rotarian Marilyn to kindly introduce her two guests.
Thank you, President Ritesh. My first guest is Mr. Dominic Kioko. He is a professional in marketing. He's currently working with as a distributor for Airtel in Thika and the larger region. He has previously worked with Agfa and Kodak. He is my dad, and he's an interested person when it comes to matters solar. So I thought it would be good to invite him to this talk today. My second guest is Victor Okello. Victor is an architect, and we have previously worked together at the same office. Thank you, President.
Thank you so much, Rotarian Marilyn, and welcome to all the guests. I have a guest who has been visiting us very frequently, a good friend, Shubrika. Shubrika, welcome. And I will allow Rotarian Rashmi to say a few words about her guest for today before we actually go to the official introduction.
Thanks, Ritesh. Today my guest is Pulkit Shamshery. I think he's the youngest person I've ever had as a guest in the club. And Pulkit, I don't know him very well professionally, but I have known his parents, and they're very proud of how he has developed into a fine young man. And he is going to be talking about going solar in Kenya, a case for protecting our resources. I have heard snatches of it, and I believe it's very interesting what kind of work he's doing. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Illumina Africa, and he's very well qualified to hold that post. Should I do his intro? Should I give a brief about what all he's done, or would you like me to do it later?
What we will do, thanks Rashmi, is we will have the announcements first. And now that we have introduced our guests, we will do an official introduction of our guest speaker shortly after the announcements.
Thanks.
Ambassador Dr. Josephine, is this a good time for announcements?
Thank you very much, President Ritesh, fellow Rotarians and guests. I have a very brief announcement. And my announcement is about the Rotary DCA for 2021. I'm sure many of you have been reading the notices on the DCA. Initially, we were going to have it in December. It was rescheduled for the 10th of April this year. And in the initial notices, the DCA was going to be held at the Mount Kenya Safari Club. Now we have a change of venue, largely due to the fact that the Safari Club is unavailable. We are moving the DCA 2021 to the amazing All Pajeta Conservancy, which is within the same distance as Nanyuki town. However, the new venue assures us a unique out of Africa experience. We will be having plenaries in the open, dining and entertainment spaces, also innovatively set out in the open, but all with strict adherence to COVID protocols and other safety regulations. There will be special activities like golfing, biking, game tracking, environment, and running. And indeed, we have a world-class set of speakers for several of our panel discussions. We have had a preview of some of the speakers. I don't want to share their names right now, but I can assure you we're going to have top-notch speakers. There'll be an exciting time for friendships and fellowship and lots of fun for yourselves and family. As you're aware, the committee is being run by Paul Kaseme of the Rotary Club of Muthaiga. Kindly be in touch with him directly, but also do register for the DCA under the contacts that have been provided on the notices that are going up. I'll just remind you that it's dca2021.rotary9212.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Dr. Josephine, and we look forward to many members of our club registering for this very important district conference and assembly. And I believe it's also going to be in a hybrid platform, whereby it's going to be physical and also perhaps there's going to be online way of attending this as well, as what happened earlier this year. I will now request Rotarian Rashmi to kindly introduce our guest speaker for today.
Thank you, President Ritesh. As I said, we have Pulkit Shamshery as our guest speaker today. Pulkit co-founded Illumina Africa, a solar developer based in Nairobi. And he did his undergraduate and Master of Engineering in Mechanical Engineering at Trinity College, University of Cambridge, UK. And then followed it up with a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, USA in 2016. Pulkit wants to dedicate his life to create opportunities for the less opportunistic, and he is currently doing his MBA from the Sloan Institute of Management. Pulkit, over to you and welcome. We are very happy to have you as a guest speaker.
Thank you, Rashmi. Thank you, President Ritesh and fellow Rotarians. Excited to share my learnings and takeaway about solar in Kenya. Just some housekeeping items. If you can't hear me, just let me know. If you have any clarifying questions, you can pass them on to President Ritesh and he can ask me during the talk. I'll talk or I'll speak for 20 to 25 minutes, and then we can open up the floor to questions. I would like to share my screen, so if you could.
Maybe you can just give a small background of your schooling and your life in Kenya before you moved on.
Right. Well, it was part of what I was going to present. So is it, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Sweet. All right, so as Rashmi mentioned, I'm Pulkit Shamshery. I'm the co-founder and technical director of Illumina Africa, and I'm excited to talk about going solar in Kenya. So today's agenda, I'll talk about a bit about myself, then the industrialistic viewpoint of what solar is, why should we go solar, and how to go solar. These are questions that I get asked all the time, and I just wanted to present that here. Solar has been in the Kenyan news of late, especially in the end of November and December, with a lot of noise around KPLC not wanting solar, EPRA trying to make solar difficult. So I'll just go into a brief of what all that fuss is about. And then I'll talk a little bit about, as Rotarians, how can you get involved into impactful access of energy projects. So yeah, just a little bit about myself. As has already been mentioned, I did my mechanical engineering degree from University of Cambridge. That was my bachelor's degree. And then I did a master's in engineering, but my project was focused on solar power and agri-tech from MIT. And currently I'm doing an MBA from MIT's business school called the Sloan School of Management. Between my MBA and my mechanical engineering degree, I co-founded and still run a solar developing startup in Kenya called Illumina Africa. We have developed over 2 megawatts of solar installations, and I'm happy to talk about that going further. One of the main reasons I started Illumina was I've been born and brought up in Kenya. And my dad actually does a lot of geothermal power plants in Kenya. So since childhood, I've seen what access to energy has brought to economy of Kenya. And it was always my inspiration to come back and do something for rural electrification. We soon realized that rural electrification is much harder from making it feasible from a financial standpoint. So we dwelled into commercial industrial solar just to get our name out there, gain our core competency before we wanted to go back into rural electrification. So let's dive into what solar is. So I firstly wanted to distinguish between solar water heating systems and solar electric, what we also call as solar PV. So in 2017, the Kenyan government wanted everyone to have what we see on the left, a solar water heater. And what basically this is are panels which have water filled in them. And then due to the sun's heat, the water heats up, hot water rises, goes into the tank, cold water is more dense, goes back into the plates, and you get hot water, which is different to what I want to talk about today, which is solar electric. Solar electric panels are made from crystalline silicon, mainly from crystalline silicon. And here, photon energy from the sun energizes electrons, and then those can be collected and passed through an electric circuit to create electricity. So flow of electrons is electricity, and basically the electrons absorb solar photon energy, get energized, jump around, are collected, pass through a circuit, and then we have electricity. And I'll focus on the electric part today. So I'll be a little bit technical for the first 3 minutes just to get everyone on the same page as to what solar is and what the main components of solar are. So the few main components of solar, firstly is the solar panel, which is what converts sunlight into electricity or flow of electrons. Then you have the mounting system. How are you going to attach the panel either to a ground mounted system or to your roof so that they don't go flying away. Then you have the inverter. The inverter is important because solar panels produce what's called direct current, whereas most of the electricity that's used in machines at your homes, lighting, TV, everything machinery-wise that you connect to KPLC is AC. So what an inverter does is it converts power to AC. And then you have balance of systems, which is basically cables, electrical safety, monitoring system. And then if you want to go the extra route of being 100% on solar, you can add battery systems so that you can save excess electricity that solar produces during the day and then use it at night. So today we'll talk about what is commonly used in industry which is called a grid-tied system, where you basically have solar which directly feeds into your industry's electrical circuit. And then it works synchronously with the grid. So here as an example, what I show is if you have an industry that's using 120 kilowatts of power and solar is only able to provide 100, the rest comes from KPLC and it's integrated seamlessly. In the case where, say, there are clouds or at night when solar isn't able to produce the electricity that's required by the industry, most of the electricity comes from KPLC. In the case where your industry is actually using less power than what's required, what's being produced by solar, what ends up happening is solar wants to feed back to the grid. It wants to, electricity that's produced wants to go somewhere. So it'll try to feed back to the grid. But in Kenya, this net metering feedback to the grid hasn't really been, it's not in regulation yet. So what we as developers do is we derate the solar so that it doesn't provide excess energy and it's only used in self-consumption. So this is like some technical background of what solar is and how it works for an industry. And why it's called grid-tied is if the grid is down, then the solar is also down. And this is because it's in order to protect KPLC personnel so that there's no feedback into the grid causing hazard to individuals that are working on the electric lines. Let's move to why should we go solar? So there's been global warming is real, despite what the ex-president of the US says. There's been shown to be causality between the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide and temperature increase in the world. And the 2-degree limit is a limit where scientists say that humanity can't come back from it. There'll be disastrous effects such as flooding in certain areas, droughts in other areas, huge increases in food insecurity and water insecurity. And if we keep going down the path that we are right now with no action, in the next 80 years, we'll be at 4.5-degree increase, which is just going to lead to huge increases in seawater levels and then everything else that I described. If you sit in Nairobi traffic these days, you'll realize how hot the sun is, which wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago. And Kenya has been going through its experiences of extreme droughts and then extreme rainfall. And that's because of impacts of global warming. 25% of the greenhouse gas emission comes from production of electricity. And then the graph on the right, what I'm trying to show here is solar is 10 times less carbon intensive than the lowest fossil fuel generator, which is natural gas. And in Kenya, we do use hydro and geothermal a lot, but we also do have a lot of thermal, such as oil, producing and generating assets. So going solar really helps reduce the impact that your industry or any industry can have on carbon dioxide emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. So one of the biggest reasons to go solar is environmental. And for this reason, more than 280 massive companies and counting have committed to go 100% renewable. This, just to name a few, are Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Google, but many other smaller industries all around the globe. So it's just that commitment to the future generations that going solar provides. Then there's an economic reason to go solar in Kenya. If you notice, Kenya lies right between France and New Zealand in the cost of electricity. For households, it costs about 21 US cents of date. This, when you compare it to India or China, which are like the largest places where Kenyans import goods from, and what the industries and manufacturers in Kenya are competing with, OPEX of electricity costs end up being a huge contributor. And if you're competing with industries in India and China, I agree there are other aspects that go into making an industry competitive, but reduction in cost of electricity is one of them. And what we've seen in the past 40 years is that solar energy, or cost of solar, has reduced 300 times over the past 40 years. So what this means is, if we look at the cost of KPLC since 2008 to right now, it's been increasing constantly at 2% every year. And currently it's around 16 shillings for industries and 21 shillings for households. But if you go solar and self-own solar, that cost could be around 5 cents. And if you don't want to pay that upfront capital, there are a lot of other financing schemes that have come up, such as a PPA or a lease to own. And in that, what the financier provides is you don't need to put any money up front, it's zero down, and you get 20 to 40% discount, depending on the size of your system, to the cost of KPLC. So that really increases your competitive advantage and reduces your OPEX costs of running your industry. The other reason to go solar is a social reason. You end up creating 5x more direct and indirect jobs when you compare to just what's there right now in KPLC and all the other energy generators and providers. I get asked, how do you go solar? I know this slide's a bit busy, but I'll just go through it one by one. So what I will say to people that ask me this is, get competitive bids. There are a lot of solar providers in Kenya. Do your due diligence on which solar provider it is, what their experience is, and the experience of their team members. Make sure they hold all the necessary EPRA and NCA licenses, and the staff hold all the EPRA and EBK certifications. Do your due diligence on design. Ensure that the major components, which are the solar panel, are tier 1, and the standard warranty is 25 years. Ensure that the design is using a top 10 solar inverter with a minimum of 10-year warranty. Make sure that the design, installation, and commissioning adheres to all the Kenyan standards and the ICE. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat. IEC standards. Do pay attention to safety in the electrical components that are being used. A lot of installations that I've seen personally do not have lightning or earthing systems, some of the safety components that solar needs to have. So do pay attention to those, and then do make sure that they've obtained all the necessary licenses. For certain solar sizes above a certain kilowatt peak, etc., you need NEMA licenses, you need permits to install solar. So just make sure that your solar provider is doing that, just so that you aren't on the receiving end of the county government or whoever coming and causing trouble for you. And also do understand financing options and how it affects your balance sheet. There are multiple financing options. You can pay cash up front, you can get a loan. There could be a power purchase agreement, which is basically the same thing as what you have with KPLC. You buy certain number of units of electricity, you pay them per unit. It's the same with the solar provider. You'll buy certain units of electricity of solar, and then you'll pay a set fee or a floating based on what your contract is to the financier, and do ensure that these financiers have a generational license from EPRA. I've seen a lot of PPAs where that's not the case. And then there is lease to own, where you can say that it's a lease, you pay a set amount, a fixed amount monthly, and then after 10 to 12 years, you own the system. So these are like a few things I would say to take note of if you're deciding to go solar in your industries. Now, coming to solar being in the news. There's been a lot of like news headlines being made at the end of November where some of it reads like EPRA races to strangle solar use, or switch to solar is dead. The state plans to police solar industry with tough rules. And what I just wanted to like give a brief overview of what this means. So on the left, what we have is what the electricity industry looks like currently. You have the generators, which is basically the geothermal. You have Kengen, or your independent power providers, which could be, again, geothermal or hydro, thermal sources. These providers have a PPA with KPLC. So KPLC buys power from these generators, transmits it through the grid, and distributes it to you, the consumer. And then you end up paying a charge to KPLC. What ended up happening recently is KPLC has signed all these long-term, extremely inflexible and inefficient PPAs with the IPPs, which has led to extremely high cost of electricity. What that's done is that that's made going solar convenient for industries, because going solar has reduced your cost of electricity. So once a consumer goes solar, the demand of electricity from KPLC reduces. Once that happens, KPLC has all these PPAs which they've contracted excess power from all the IPPs. So they need to somehow pay for that. So the way that they're trying to do that is either through increasing prices or through figuring out how to either renegotiate PPAs or not pay PPAs, or working with EPRA and the solar industry to find a win-win. So that's what the whole news is around. If all the consumers, so industries make up 56% of KPLC's revenues, and if everyone switches to solar, about 25% of their revenues just disappear. So they're really trying to figure out how to work closely with all the stakeholders to find a win-win. The other thing that I wanted to mention is KPLC going under is never a good thing for anyone, because we need the grid to be stable in order for solar to function. As I described above, if there is no grid, solar is not going to work unless you go with battery systems, which is super expensive for commercial industrial scale. So the survival of KPLC or any form of distribution grid is very required for solar in Kenya or in any country. So the solar industry really needs to work together to figure out how to promote solar, go green, while also being able to keep the grid stable. The other news was EPRA had announced this new act in 2020, which was set to have made it harder for solar installers to do solar. In my reading of the act, it just makes it difficult for inexperienced and unlicensed developers. And I'm actually a big proponent of this act because it makes sure that the solar industry is not developing solar which is done by inexperienced personnel or is not up to standard to what it should be. So I'm actually a big proponent of this act. There needs to be regulation so that not anyone can come in and install big solar plants, because it has a huge effect on the stability of the grid and stability of the grid is very important just for the operation of industries in Kenya. And then, as I mentioned, that the whole solar ecosystem needs to come together and figure out what the win-win is. So we can't keep pointing that KenGen and KPLC or EPRA are trying to strangle solar. I think everyone needs to work together to figure out what's optimal. And I've been in those conversations as part of the Kenya Renewable Association and also other outreaches that I've done. So now coming to how you as a Rotarian can have impact through solar. So in Kenya, only 40% of rural population has access to electricity. This number fluctuates based on which news source or which data source that you try to get it from, but this is the average that I've found. So 60% of rural population does not have access to electricity. And we've seen in the past or through decades of industrialization that access to energy is a huge contributor for economic advancements, to get out of the cycle of poverty. And that was always the big push for me to come back to Kenya and try to do something in the distributed energy source in Kenya. So as the Rotary, I know you do a lot of projects. There is a lot of scope to do projects around solar powered mini grids, or look into how you can deploy solar home systems, which were very essential during COVID, because a lot of students in rural Kenya were able to rely on TVs powered by solar to get education. And then solar powered boreholes for agriculture and water usage. So there's a lot of scope that Rotarians can come together and deliver impact in Kenya itself through solar projects. And yeah, that would be the end of what I have to add. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Pulkit, and Rotarians and guests. If you have any questions or comments, kindly do inbox or raise your hand. Pulkit, before we
Hi,
go...
Ritesh.
Yes.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Pulkit, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about cost-efficient storage of energy, the different technologies that are out there, so that if you trap solar during the day, then the best way to store it so that you can use it at night. And then perhaps you could also touch on architecture that optimizes solar energy, because I was in Denmark, I was studying there some while back, and I noticed that their new buildings trap the sun throughout the day, so that as you know, the sun goes from dusk to dawn, it's trapping energy throughout the day. And I was wondering if any of that is being employed in Kenya, and perhaps where we could start. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Let me start by answering the storage question. So storage currently is extremely expensive. So there are different types of storage out there. So you can store solar energy in chemical form as a battery, either as a lead acid battery or lithium ion. Those are the two main storage, chemical storage out there. There's also flow, etc. But these two are the most widely used in the developing and developed worlds. Then there is other forms such as hydro or pump storage. There is compressed air that you can use, etc. But what ends up happening is solar costs on approximate grid-tied solar costs about $1 a watt. So that means it goes back to like 5 shillings a kilowatt or a unit. But if you start adding battery system, that increases the cost to $3 to $5 a watt. So that increases the cost of your electricity to 25, 30 cents. which is even higher than what KPLC is. So then there is no economic benefit of going solar. But yes, if you want to go completely green, etc., then you can opt for one of the few battery storage, either battery storage or some other storage technologies that I mentioned. Coming back to your architectural question, I know that the new building at INM, the INM's new head office, has built-in photovoltaic cells in them. So there is progress in Kenya to be able to use electricity through having glass that has built-in solar cells. My only say in that would be Kenya being at the equator. You need solar panels for like efficient trapping of solar to be at 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. So if you have panels which are at 90 degrees, you're not really trapping that much energy. So as architects, what we can think about is how to maximize the use of roofs to ensure that we can deploy as much solar as possible. And that would be where do you put your ventilation systems, taking care of shading, because shading has huge impacts on how much solar is able to produce. So architects can take a look at how do they design the roof of a system or of a building to ensure maximum utilization of solar. Also, the angles at which the roofs are, 10, 15 degrees is what we would recommend. Anything larger just ends up decreasing the efficiency of solar panels. I hope that answered your question, Irene.
Yes, it does. To a normal house that's looking to just have solar for household usage, how much would that cost compared to KPLC? I'm talking a household with, for 3-4 kids, you need shower, you need to cook, you need TV and such domestic usage. How much would that be? Yeah.
So again, it depends on if you go lead acid or lithium ion, but on average, I would say that the cost of electricity from KPLC is around 21. I would say that the cost of electricity from a battery-backed solar system would also be in the range of 15 to 20 shillings.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we will take some further questions and comments. I will call out individuals in order as to how the questions and comments have come into the chat. First, we will have Vice President Ambassador Dr. Josephine, who has a question, followed by Mike.
Thank you. My first question has actually been answered, but since you've spoken about individual costs, I want to ask a little more about deploying solar, but about deploying it to the grid along with bioenergy sources. I'm saying this because many Kenyan households would deploy solar alongside other sources of energy to complement what comes from the grid. Maybe you could give us some thoughts on that. Many of us have farms in the rural area where we go to, so we'd like to see how we can utilize all the resources at our disposal. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So I wouldn't know the associated costs of what it would cost using biomass or biogas. But what I can say is it's possible. You can combine solar with other sources of electricity seamlessly. So you can have a system where you have biomass, you have wind, you have solar, you have battery system, all integrated together, working synchronously with the grid to provide electricity for your household. So it's possible. I wouldn't be able to tell you what the associated cost would be for a biogas or a biomass production.
let me ask an associated question. Do you know of anyone who is able to put that kind of technology in place locally?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's not coming at the top of my head right now. There must be other solar providers or energy providers that do that. I will not be able to mention a company name currently. I do know a few that do solar, wind and batteries, but I haven't researched around biomass.
Thank you very much indeed, Pulkit. And now we have a comment from our past president, Mike Eldon, followed by a question from Marilyn.
Thank you, Ritesh. And before I come on to my comment, I just want to say that yesterday evening, Josephine and I tuned in to Anuja's presentation on CSR in the Globe Ethics presentation hosted by our fellow Rotarian Michael Hopkins. And well done, Anuja, for a very highly competent presentation where she actually reviewed her PhD thesis. Coming to today, Pulkit, thank you very much for giving us your promotion for solar energy. And I think we've really taken off in a very good way, almost as you indicate, despite Kenya Power here, who, as we've seen in the media recently, were not amused at how many senior users of power are creating their own solar sources. And we've seen all the Total petrol stations have gone this way. We've seen Bidco having its own energy manufacturing plant. And I'm familiar with a lot of this as a director of Davis and Shetcliffe, who also, by the way, do CSR in this, and including with Rotary. And we had some interactions with them recently, which I think we're pursuing. My question to you is, if you were advising the government on what to do about Kenya Power, given its long-term contracts, given the quality of its management and the poverty of its service, what should happen to Kenya Power?
Thank you, Mike. I think that's a very loaded question. So when I think about where the world's gone in the developed countries, there is a deregulated market. So you have auctions where people auction how much energy they can provide their head or our head, and the highest cost of that auction is what's charged to the client based on what the capacity requirement is for that hour or for that second. I guess that's where the world needs to move to. Having said that, because of the inefficient PPA markets, etc., I think there needs to be a way of going back to the PPA providers and renegotiating these contracts. I do understand if you just cut the PPA, you make them unbankable. That would reduce investments in energy or in energy generation in Kenya, because nobody in the future would want to invest in energy generation going forward. So you can't just do that. So there needs to be a way of coming together and understanding between the IPPs, KPLC, to figure out how can they work together to renegotiate the contracts so that it still makes economic sense for the IPPs, but it's not at such high levels as they are right now. I think some of their PPAs for very cheap electricity is at 12 cents, which is unacceptable. So there needs to be I don't know, I don't want to say change in management, but a change in approach to how PPAs are signed going forward.
You do want to say change in management.
That would be very controversial. So, but yes, change in approach is required, and a viewpoint of what the future would look like is very important. And how can you keep the grid stable, having all the ancillary services, as well as when solar is down, because solar can be down during cloudy days, etc. How do you keep the grid stable and still be able to pull in power, have that reserve generation? So I think there's a lot that goes into what KPLC does, and we don't give them too much credit for just trying to keep the grid stable. But I do agree that there needs to be a new way of going forward in terms of how do they negotiate future contracts and how do they renegotiate current contracts.
What reassured me was the appointment of Sachin, who's a former chairman of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, to be one of the directors. And I'm sure that he is exerting his private sector influence now in his 21st century thinking into the strategic processes there.
Yeah, thank you for that statement.
Thank you so much. And now we have a question from Marilyn. Marilyn, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Pulkit, thank you very much for your presentation. I tried to get into MIT for my undergrad, but I didn't. Well, could you please take us through setting up a home solar system, just briefly? Thank you.
Sure. So for home solar systems, what's important is to understand the first few steps of going solar in any industries, being home or industries. First, you need to understand what your load consumption looks like, not only from your bill, but also an understanding of how it looks from an hourly pattern. Once you know how much energy you consume on a daily basis, you can figure out what size of solar would be required and what size of batteries would be required. And this could be done by one of your solar installers, or if you want me to give you an idea, 1 kilowatt of solar will generate on average about 4 to 5 kilowatt hours of energy. So you can do your own sizing based on that calculation and how much your house requires. And then you just need to figure out what your costs or how expensive do you want the system to be, either the lead acid or lithium ion. And then based on that, you can decide which inverter you want to go with. Do you want to go with some of the German technology like SMA, or do you want to go with Chinese technology, which has proven to function well as well? So I think the steps would be figuring out what your load consumption is, how much solar and batteries would you require, how would you wire those together, and then having somebody, a certified electrician or a certified solar installer, to come and install it at your house. If you want more details, if you could ask me a more pointed question, I'd be happy to answer that. But that's like the overview. And then also making sure that your roof is capable of handling solar. Some roofs in Kenya are not designed to handle the weight of extra loading. So that's another consideration to take.
Thank you. I think that's sufficient for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn, and thank you, Pulkit. And do we have any further questions or comments for our speaker for today before we have Rotarian Irene give a vote of thanks? Ah, yes, we have Past President Leah.
Hi, thank you so much for such a wonderful, very informative discussion, presentation. I'm at the Kenyan coast, and I'm willing to give up a lot, but air conditioning is unfortunately not one of them, especially in these very, very hot and humid months. And is there anything in Kenya yet, that can, provide air conditioning with solar panels?
So the way you can do it is you can install a solar home, not a solar home system, but solar at your home with some sort of battery backup system to be able to power your air conditioning unit. So solar is capable of, it generates AC power, so it's capable of handling all your AC loads. It's just how well do you size it. A lot of people don't try to put some of the heavy consuming loads of your houses on solar, but that's more because of it increases the cost and it reduces the lifespan of your battery system. But if you're willing to take that extra cost, then you can go solar with air conditioning.
I mean, obviously, in Mombasa, our highest bills come from the air conditioning part of it, from Kenya Power. Really horrible. You know, you don't have to think about it in Nairobi, but here, it's crazy.
Right. I don't think there is anything that goes direct solar to air conditioning throughout the day that I can think of in Kenya yet. I know there's a lot of work in the refrigeration system and having some sort of phase change material just to be able to store solar, but yeah, nothing that I can think of in air conditioning. I know there's a lot of work that's being done at MIT around this aspect of like, how do you really cool using solar energy? So once there's more knowledge, I'll be sure to share that. But I don't think there's anything commercial in Kenya yet.
Thank you so much.
Past President Leah, I know you must be waiting for the day when you can have AC, which is solar powered, right? Yes, so now we have a question by Dr. Beatrice. Dr. Beatrice?
Good afternoon, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Hello. Great. Thank you very much, Pulkit, for a fantastic presentation. Really pleased because I was actually talking about solar energy with a construction and contracting architectural group of people recently. I wanted to just get clarification on the future regarding KPLC and the relationship with alternative energy source providers. My understanding is that the infrastructure of KPLC is much needed for anyone who's going to take on the task of changing sources of energy, no matter whether it is residential or commercial. And that therefore, whilst it may come across as a threat to Kenya Power, that actually a symbiotic relationship is what's required. My reason for requesting clarification is that I witnessed the change of British Telecom and the different providers over the years in England. And there was a huge fight at the beginning because they had the monopoly and they had the infrastructure. But once they realized that they had such a great history in terms of the infrastructure, that the new providers could not function without British Telecom's infrastructure, then the market was stabilized. But it left us, the customers, in a bit of an abyss for a period when the negotiations were ongoing. So my question is, seeing as this is a current shift, where does that leave us as the consumers, and how can our voice strengthen the symbiotic relationship between KPLC and the new providers? Because we either tend to lose if we don't know what our role is, or we get caught in between, and neither of those situations is favorable. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Again, just to reiterate, yes, these KPLC or the transmission and distribution asset is super required for any form of generation to get from where it is to where you're consuming it. As Mike mentioned, I think the best way of getting a voice out there is to come together as a cohort of manufacturers and industrialists and consumers, and present what we desire. We desire more renewable sources of power, and only ask KPLC through the new management elect who was part of CAM to voice our concerns. We want X percentage more renewables. And I think Kenya does a good job of that. Like a lot of Kenyan power's electricity comes from geothermal and hydro, which are considered to be renewables. So yeah, as a consumer, I think that's where the focus has to be. We have to come together as a cohort and really voice our concerns to the board and management, make them understand where we are coming from, why we need these alternative sources, and what we are willing to pay or not pay for them.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Beatrice, and thank you, Pulkit. And I really like how in a subtle way, we're talking about the management of KPLC in a very subtle way. Okay, now I'm going to hand over now to Irene, Rotarian Irene Gatiaka, who's going to give a vote of thanks. Irene?
I am here. Thank you. Thank you, President Ritesh. Pulkit, thank you very much for your topic. It was timely because all I keep thinking is that even on what you would call a good day from KPLC, the intermittent on and off means that there is that break between whether your other source is generator or whatever. So it makes it such poor quality of the product that they're providing. And a few cents more to have some level of comfort from something like solar, I think a lot more people would go for that than to have, this unpredictable, power that's provided by KPLC. And so what this means is that we're not going to do away with KPLC, but other competitors providing, quality power means that they'll step up their game. So once again, President Ritesh, it's back to back to management. I think if we allow for a few more players, then they too will stop being comfortable in the very mediocre provision of power. So thank you very much for this topic. Maybe the next time you're here, we can explore further on how to, provide solar to rural areas so that it doesn't burden them with the cost and they can enjoy, the same privilege. We look forward to that as well. So once again, thank you and come back again.
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for your time. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, Pulkit. And there's a request from some club members who would like to have your contact and email address. I will get them from Rotarian Rashmi, if that's okay with you.
Yep.
Perfect.
Definitely. Yeah, and happy to answer any more questions offline as well.
Perfect. We're very grateful. Thank you for this very enlightening and educational talk. And we definitely look forward to engaging with you in further conversations. And there was also a comment by one of our past presidents, Dr. Manu Chandaria, who also says congratulations to the speaker. He was particularly interested and glad to listen to this wonderful talk. So thank you on behalf of all members. And in closing, we have Rotarians from Rotary Club of Mombasa, Bahari, right? Correct? And we also have some visitors who are not Rotarians, but have come in capacity as visitors. So kindly raise a glass if you have something to drink. Alternatively, kindly put your hand to your chest as we raise a toast to Rotary the world over.
Thank you, Pulkit. Thank you so much for sparing the time. And I know you're on vacation here. So a big thank